Welcome, everybody, both here in the room as well as online. As usual, we have way more participants online than here. So Rachel needs no introduction. Adam, I understand, is online. And Adam is a health economist and health services researcher who works closely with Rachel. We also have some team members from Rachel's team sitting in the back here. So I will hand it over to Rachel for a talk about AI and qualitative research.
Great. Thank you so much, Titus. So it's a pleasure to be here today. I am not a qualitative researcher. I would consider myself more of a quantitative researcher, health services researcher. I was trained as an epidemiologist, but I think I am a team scientist. So I've certainly worked on teams. I'd say most of my research for the last 15 years has involved qualitative research, some sort of qualitative research component. I've learned a lot with the team members that I've worked with. And of course, being the president and CEO of the Regenstrief Institute, we do a lot in clinical informatics. AI is a big topic of many of our conversations today and has been for some time. So really excited to do this as part of this series. And my colleague, Dr. Adam Wilk, he's here virtually. I will hand it off to him sort of later in the presentation. But also wanted to acknowledge a member of our team. She's a Regenstrief staff member, Jade Buford, did a lot of help with this talk. She did a lot of research, helped us with literature reviews. We got a librarian help too. So I just wanted to acknowledge she helped with these slides. She helped with some critical review of some papers that we had that incorporated this. So really wanted to make sure to recognize this is a team effort. All right, so a few disclosures for both myself and Dr. Wilk are noted here. We'll talk about a few examples from some of our own research. Our team does a lot of work. Our transplant research team is housed at the Regenstrief Institute and in the Center for Health Services Research. And we focus a lot on access to kidney transplantation. So I'm going to draw from a few examples from that work as well. So our objectives for today are threefold. So we want to explore how AI is being used and or could be used in qualitative research. We want to share some real-world examples of using AI tools for transcription and thematic analysis within some published literature, as well as within some of our own research in the transplant space. And then discuss some challenges, limitations, some ethical considerations, and then recommendations for use of AI in this space. So also want to acknowledge some of the talks in some of the prior series for this AI workshop that things are changing extremely fast. So things like we did a literature review, but obviously you all know it takes a long time to get research published. And so even some of the things that we're presenting that were published may be very outdated right now. The way things are changing so quickly, the way the models and large language models are changing. So recognizing that today as well. So to kick us off, I want to give a nod to our Indiana CTSI. They are sponsoring this AI workshop series, and wanted to highlight a really good article for those of you that may be more on the T3 or T4 translational science spectrum, where that focuses really on translation to practice in T3 and translation to population health in T4. And implementation science is an area that our team, it's very important in a domain of expertise in our team for our transplant research, but also at the Regenstrief Institute. And our team, and at Regenstrief, really focus on this idea of working towards ensuring that evidence-based interventions are adopted, implemented, and sustained in real-world healthcare settings, health systems, and communities. And I would say just if people want to do one paper, if you're going to read one paper, this is a really good one for just a background about how AI holds promise to advance really the placement of evidence-based interventions more quickly into health systems or communities. It talks about some of the qualitative research components around advancing how AI can advance or accelerate its goals of closing the evidence to practice gap. And I'd say that for me and our team, that's probably one of the most exciting areas, is that AI is able to really help our team go more quickly in some of the qualitative research that we're doing on our team. So obviously, we all know AI is transforming research workflows. Tools like NLP or large language models, machine learning, these are all really able to help us process unstructured data more quickly and efficiently. And this is really especially relevant for qualitative researchers who may be working with large populations. You think about just how much time, I think about some of our research that we've done in the past and that we've been limited to not doing as much or working with as many populations because of time. So I think that's one of the most exciting things about this. And we see more and more that researchers are increasingly integrating AI tools into their qualitative workflows, and we're going to continue to see more and more. I think it has to be done responsibly, and we'll talk a bit more about that in the talk today. So as we know, quantitative research has always really excelled at handling big data. So organizing or coding and tracing patterns across massive data sets. But qualitative research really relies on rich, unstructured textual data and has traditionally faced challenges in scaling up and processing information quickly. So this is where AI and especially large language models are transformative. They can process and interpret vast amounts of unstructured text, clinical notes, interviews, focus groups, open-ended survey responses. Those are a lot of the types of qualitative research that our team does. And they can do this really at a speed and scale that is, I would say was more previously unimaginable. These were not things we were thinking about 15 years ago when we were doing some of this work, right? So some of these tasks that once took weeks, months, over a year are becoming much faster. So we can, I think, identify patterns more quickly, doing things in, that just think about transcription alone, how quickly that can be done. And I think that there's some promise that AI can't it's not that it's just about the speed, that's a big advantage, but it can offer more deep insights as well by surfacing subtle connections or themes that could be missed in things like a manual review by humans that may come with their own biases. Obviously, AI has biases too. We'll talk about that too. But importantly, I think AI can really support qualitative research at every step of the research process. That can go from, when you're preparing your data and organizing your data, analysis, synthesis, and even reporting, and really helping us to focus more on interpretation and less on the tedious manual tasks that we typically have to do that can also be very costly. So, I think in short, is qualitative research more helpful than in quantitative research? Not sure yet. That maybe you have some opinions on that and want to offer some at the end of the talk. But it certainly opens lots of possibility for discovering impact. So as I mentioned, AI can support many stages of qualitative research. Some of these are listed here, from question development, literature reviews, transcription is a big one, thematic analysis, digital ethnography. We're going to be previewing a few examples from these, and these tools are, again, becoming more integrated into qualitative research workflows and in some of the tools and software that people are using. You're going to see more and more of this. Maybe some of you have some experience beyond what we're offering today as well. And I think things like that are listed up here, things like that research question brainstorming as an example, where if you want to have your junior researchers or research assistants may wonder how narrow or broad their hypothesis should be, they might work with AI to suggest different levels of scale for that hypothesis or help refine scope or feasibility. Visual prompt and avatar development, our research team has used AI video tools to create webinars as part of our intervention materials. And I'll try to play, hopefully that'll work, one of these AI generated videos later in the presentation. So tools like HeyGen and Adobe Firefly can also support avatar creation and visual storytelling for qualitative prompts. And then data collection, a lot of examples here that, potentially including interview guides and survey instruments and bolstering those. Market research companies are already using AI to lead interviews, although we haven't seen as much in the published academic literature on this, but I think that potentially could hold some promise. We'll have some examples later in the talk on that. Then I would say automated transcription and translation. This is, tools like otter.ai and AI media have really significantly reduced transcription time, and we'll show an example of that in the talk. thematic analysis with natural language processing. I'm going to present a case study comparing manual and AI-assisted thematic analysis using open-ended survey responses from dialysis staff from one of our research studies to show as an example. And then there's a number of others listed. I won't go into it, but I think there's lots of opportunities here. And obviously, we can't cover in depth today all the many things in qualitative research and where AI can help, but lots of examples. And then I'll just mention again, I think with the potential to enhance speed across these, but certainly want to still have humans in the loop here, as we've heard from many of the prior talks. And it does certainly have some risks to robustness, and we'll talk about that. Okay, so if you wanted, before I get into some of the examples around some of our transplant team, I wanted to acknowledge our transplant team. You can learn more about us here in the QR code. Some of us are pictured here, but our team's research often includes this qualitative component to give context to the data and numbers. So many of our researchers are more on the quantitative side, but we also, as I've mentioned, I think almost every grant that I've been the PI on for the last 15 years has had some sort of qualitative aim or component, and that's really important for the context. So in our transplant research, qualitative methods really help us understand the lived experiences of patients and providers that can be really helpful for us. And so this often includes, we do a lot in terms of intervention development for improving access to transplant. So things like our implementation, science perspective, how did the intervention work? Did it work as planned? Why or why not? That often includes a qualitative component. Okay, so some of our examples here, these are just a few examples where some publications on our team that used qualitative analysis. These publications did not use AI, but could have, and these are things where we're looking back and saying, look at all of the methodologies that we used in the past that could have been helped. And so a few examples are an open-ended survey among dialysis and transplant center clinicians, an implementation assessment of a multi-component, multi-level intervention that was among dialysis facilities across the country, examining why an intervention component worked or didn't work. And then one that's on the right-hand side that may seem a bit more quantitative in nature. This was focused on predicting rehospitalization among transplant recipients. We used both structured and unstructured data. But in this original study, and this was back in, I think, 2016 that we got the funding, it's like, I feel like we did this study way too early. And if we did it now, it could have been so much more efficient. But we used clinical notes of thousands of transplant recipients to extract meaningful predictors and then put those into a quantitative predictive model. But our methods were painstakingly slow back in the time when we were working on this, where we really struggled with template-based notes and basic NLP methods. And today with large language models, we could have really sped up tremendously with automatic extraction, language contextualization, and moving beyond keyword searches from these clinical notes to be able to plug in there. So I think that point around using clinical notes to unlock more powerful contextual insights does have that qualitative component. I think back to the many times where myself, other students, or people in our lab spent time pouring through clinical notes in the electronic medical record to gather insights from unstructured data to put, say, into structured data to plug that into some quantitative analysis. Huge opportunities here with AI to help with this. So I'm going to give, I gave you kind of this overview of our transplant team and why we see that. I'm going to talk about some broader examples from the literature and then go into a few examples on our team now. So with the help of the librarian as well as Jade Buford from our team, we reviewed over 40 papers on AI and qualitative research just to prepare for this talk because we were really curious. We're using some of these methods on our own. Well, what are other people doing and what's the right approach? Where should we be? We constantly need to be learning more for how we might be able to use these methods. It's evolving rapidly. So some of the things that we've learned, a lot of consistent themes. First, AI, first to acknowledge that, again, as I mentioned before, the publications, it's already outdated, right? So acknowledging that limitation. But from what's been published, at least up to last month, AI is incredibly effective at speeding up tasks like transcription, coding, and synthesis. So I mentioned tools like Otter.ai, the automated transcription tool, and Atlas, qualitative data analysis software supporting coding, theme development, and visualization are really good. And those were examples that were in the published literature about processing large volumes of qualitative data. That can be really helpful. But the published studies really consistently argued that speed isn't everything. The tools still require a lot of human interpretation to ensure depth and nuance and accuracy. AI can identify patterns, but it often doesn't understand the context the way a researcher does. And it seemed like best practices across the literature, and this is true both with and without AI, really emphasize the importance of reflexivity and ethics, where researchers really need to critically evaluate the outputs. So you have to still be the human in the loop evaluating this to make sure that this is, you can stand by these results, validate those findings, and be, of course, transparent about how AI was used, which we've heard in some prior talks in the seminar as well. All right, so there are a few different examples, and we're happy to share the literature. If any people are interested in that, feel free to contact us and let us know. But some of these, there was a study cited here, Barrera et al., that assessed the utility of AI tools in qualitative research and auto-generated thousands of codes and transcripts from interviews conducted for different cancer prevention literacy studies, and found that the tools significantly increased study speed and depth of coding feasibility with a large volume of data. Again, if you have a large volume of data, that's where you're going to get the speed here. But they also found weaknesses in methodologic rigor for appropriate consideration for context. So again, the importance of humans to validate AI work was really emphasized in those. The Cook et al. Article that is referenced here in Academic Medicine in 2025, that was a really good scoping review of 130 articles on AI's use in qualitative data analysis. And they used ChatGPT-4's effectiveness in analyzing 3 pre-existing narrative data sets. And again, similar to using their own analysis and the scoping review, found that ChatGPT was really useful for summarization tasks and word counting, but had a lot of limitations in tasks that required a lot more in-depth insights. So things like linking themes to quotes or comparing and relating themes and visualizing results of the thematic analysis were areas that the scoping review pointed out that there were more limitations. Okay, so one other example of how AI can support transcription is demonstrated in this study here, Eftekari, that was published last year in the European Journal of Cardiovascular Nursing. This one might be relevant, especially to some that are at IU that may be using some of the Microsoft Teams features, and maybe you're familiar with this, maybe you haven't used it in your research yet, but if you're using Teams and you've done this for meetings and you can see the transcription and summarizing features, maybe you're a little bit familiar with this, but this study used this in a research setting and looked at clinician and patient interview data. And their goal is to see if Teams AI transcription actually saved researchers time and reduced workload during qualitative analysis. And the answer was yes to a point. It did speed up transcription. This is sounding like a theme for all these papers that we've reviewed, and preparing the data for coding much faster, but there were also some limitations here. So it often misheard medical terms and recordings. So like beta blocker became data blocker as an example. So I think that there's obviously a need for looking over some of those to ensure that that's accurate and accurate. You're familiar with the context and the subject matter to really understand. Same with things like tone or emotion and pauses. That's really important too. So I think the takeaway from this study that I had was that the Microsoft tool, built-in transcription tool that uses AI to convert speech to text was great for a first pass, and it can handle some of the transcription quickly, but it's going to miss some of the emotional and contextual meaning of the data, which might be really important for your qualitative research. So again, having that human there is still really important. We cannot replace the qualitative researchers. And so I think that this was a good one, but noting again that the models are constantly updating, and so some of the stuff that it missed before in this publication, those are getting better and better. So we're probably going to see better and better models, and some of those limitations that we're seeing in the published literature may not be here in the next round. Yeah, did you have a question? Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a good question. And I think this one might be a good, oh, yes, the repeat. Yes. So for those of you online, somebody in the room asked whether they actually, did any of these studies use not just the transcription, but the audio of that. And so I think part of what you're, yes, some of them did. I don't believe that one that I noted did. But this next slide is actually might be a good example of the question I had is, okay, so it did okay but what's your comparison group? And I think this study is probably a better one to do that. So how does AI do compared to humans? And this is a recent study that just came out of Japan by Sagakuchi and colleagues, published in JMIR, that explored how generative AI performed in a cross-cultural qualitative context. But here they were able to compare, again, it was ChatGPT 4, so potentially some outdated models, or the models have changed, but comparing with human researchers who are analyzing clinician interviews about sacred moments in medicine, and that's a topic that's a lot more rich and emotional and cultural meaning. So I think in this case, they found roughly 80% overlap between the AI-generated themes and then those identified by the human coders. So that's pretty good, not great, but pretty good. And then the AI completed the analysis in about 60% less time. So in terms of descriptive coding and pattern recognition, the using AI in this case was quite efficient, but again, missed the cultural nuances, some of the relational subtleties or indirect communication and emotional undertones that might be really important for this particular study. So in this case, I think that the really interpretation is this would not be a good overall replacement, but there may be some ways where AI could help support and augment that as a first pass, and then still having humans to do part of that work. There was another study by Prescott and colleagues in JMIR AI that offered a complementary perspective from a digital health context and compared human qualitative coders with two large language models, ChatGPT and Bard, and analyzed patient-facing digital health messages. And that the results were actually pretty similar to the last paper that we discussed in the prior slide, in that there was about 71% thematic overlap between the AI and human analyses, and AI completed the coding process in roughly 1/10 of the time. So really, again, saving a ton of time here, but limitations in interpretive depth. So, again, AI is an efficient co-analyst, but not necessarily recommending to replace here. So I'm going to start a demonstration here, some examples of what our team has done in using AI in qualitative research, and want to look at an example using an AI transcription service and comparing it to manual transcription. I mentioned this, I think any of you that have done qualitative research can see this is probably the low-hanging fruit. If you're doing nothing, this is where I would say start with doing this. Transcription costs are always costly. When you put those into your research grants, that's costly, it's labor intensive. And this was would have been reasonably hefty costs and taken months of time when we had to do things manually. And so it's been a big time saver on our team to move to AI for transcription. So as part of an ongoing NIH-funded R01 study, this study, it's called the Radiant Health System Study. It's ongoing at IU. This data has not been published yet, but we are in partnership with 4 other health systems, and we are conducting 45-minute interviews with health system leaders to prepare for readiness for an intervention we're doing for a health systems intervention at transplant centers to improve access to transplant. So we held interviews with health system leaders at transplant centers, and the participants provided informed consent to be recorded. They were also explicitly informed that we would be using AI transcription services to process the recordings. And then after each interview, the audio file was then uploaded to AI media through a secure portal. We used their Lexi recorded transcription service, which is powered by AI, and the turnaround time was really fast. It was about 6 minutes per file, and the cost was low. It was about 20 cents per minute of audio. And just as a side note, we'll have some more information at the end of the talk about resources, but this was a third-party vendor service that had to go through IU/IRB approval, and this company has a BAA or Business Associates Agreement with IU. So more on that later, but I think it is really important, and this is part of the challenge as researchers is navigating the landscape of what tool do you use, and I think it's important, especially if you're using patient data. This was health system leader data, but to make sure that you are following all of the appropriate IRB protocols and ensure that you have permission from your institution to do that. So once the transcripts were generated, our team manually reviewed each one for accuracy and quality assurance. That included checking for speaker identification, correcting any clinical terminology or whatever that, we had that subject matter expertise that the AI didn't necessarily have, formatting for readability, and then redacting any identifiers. So that was another important step. And that was a multiple review process, and that's really consistent with our past workflow that we've done in past transcription that was done fully manually, where we had have a team member do the initial transcription, a second person conduct quality assurance. But in this case, we replaced that first step with the first person with AI instead of that second person. Does that make sense? So, and then during the quality assurance, we noticed several reoccurring issues that I have highlighted here. So the table compares AI-generated transcripts with the human-edited versions and notes a couple of the issues here. And I won't read all this since it's on the slide, but really it's some of the same issues. So AI is fast, but often lacks things like speaker identification, missing formatting, accuracy, and ability to remove identifiers were some of the issues that we noted here. And that the transcription of the interview text was a bit disjointed and lacked a natural flow. So those were things that we had to correct as well. But again, I think we found this really useful for our team. And this for this particular project included, again, 14 interviews with health system leaders. Our team has calculated that it saved us over 40 hours of work and reduced costs, but it struggled with overlapping voices, clinical terminology, punctuation, and redaction. And then we also worked with some colleagues at another institution, and we, one of our partners for this study, and they had said that the institutional approval process for using this really could hinder the that progress, right? So it may take you 40 hours just to get the administrative approvals for a new tool you might want to use. So I think knowing what tools your institution has approved for use or has existing agreements with, and then that can really save you time. If you're going off and saying, I want to work with a brand new tool, you might lose some of those efficiencies unless you have lots of studies planned or you're a big team and you're really going to get that value out of putting the administrative time in early. Okay, I think I said all these. Sorry, there we go. Okay, so now I'm going to look at how AI compares to manual methods in thematic analysis and use this is some data from dialysis staff on a study that we're looking at in disparities in kidney transplant access, and we use some open-ended surveys for this one. Okay, so there's a lot of detail here, but just to highlight the rigorous process we followed for manual thematic analysis in this study that was focused on racial disparities in access to kidney transplantation. And our research aim was really to understand how dialysis facility and patient level factors influenced completion of the transplant evaluation process for these patients. And our main question asked dialysis staff to reflect on why Black patients with end-stage kidney failure have less access to both living and deceased donor transplants. We use purposive sampling, and we recruited staff from 4 different regions across the country. And we had a sample size of about 616 respondents, and that included social workers, nurses, dietitians, medical directors, and administrators. Our analysis was grounded in a socio-ecological model, and then we used a combination of deductive coding based on theory and inductive coding emerging from the data for this. We had 2 different analysts that were independently coding responses using max QDA 20 and refining the codebook after the first 25 responses. We achieved intercoder reliability of greater than 0.8, so a strong indicator of consistency. And then coding was followed by a consensus meeting to resolve any discrepancies and ensure thematic integrity. And then we had themes and sub-themes that were developed collaboratively and refined through team discussion. So again, that was the manual way that we did this study. And then the example of manual thematic analysis, I won't go through this either in the slides, but just to say that about 92% of those 616 staff provided an open-ended response to contributors to what they felt like were some of the reasons for disparities in access to transplant. And our analysis manually identified these 4 key themes: systemic racism, bias, and stigma, hindering access, disparate education practices, adverse social determinants of health exacerbating the disparities, and then cultural factors and mistrust of the healthcare system impacting decision-making and willingness to pursue kidney transplantation. So when we used the IU-approved process and we used Microsoft Copilot to conduct a parallel thematic analysis, what we did was, I think the key, and you've heard this before too, if you've gone to some of the prior CTSI AI seminars, the prompt engineering is really important for this. So there are papers out there, scientific papers on prompt engineering. There's also a lot of prompt engineering guidance you can take all over the place, right? And probably if you use AI in your day-to-day life, you've gotten really good at this. But we informed these prompts using a paper that was recently published on thematic analysis specifically using ChatGPT, and included context, research aims, and coding frameworks within that. And we asked for thick descriptions or rich, detailed descriptions for capture nuance for this. And so I think that's a good one. Hopefully we'll continue to see more and more research literature published on methods. And I think this is another area where there's opportunity to show and publish. If you use AI in these methods, publishing what prompts you're using would be very helpful for reproducibility of research. Okay, this is a very dense slide, and I'm only going to just say, you don't have to read it, but just to say that this shows the full prompt that our research studies staff member used to guide the AI-assisted thematic. All the details of what the research, aim, the question, the context, the methods were, and fed that into the Copilot. So I'm gonna, have a little bit more details here if you want to read this part. What the prompt said after entering all this information about the actual study was, please review this above background material, familiarize yourself with the research problem, etc. I will ask you to undertake thematic analysis involving the development of code, development of themes, and conceptualization and development of a conceptual framework. And then there were multiple follow-up prompts needed. Again, we're not saying this is the best. This is going to continue to get better and better. And this was our first experience using another paper that helped guide us with these prompts. And these structured prompts really helped to ensure that the AI outputs were aligned with our qualitative goals. So I will say that the prompt engineering part is where you want to spend a bit more time, and that effort of refining the prompt appears to be really consistent with what we're seeing as best practices, at least for now. Okay, so in our example, AI identified 6 main themes: health literacy, medical mistrust, social support, access barriers, economic challenges, and provider bias, with 2 sub-themes for each main theme. And these themes were fairly consistent with the 4 themes that we identified with our manual analysis. So there's actually more themes that AI identified, but some of these lacked depth and contextual nuance. And I think that's really important, that important component of, again, we would definitely need humans in the loop, and would not want to entirely rely on AI for this thematic analysis. And this slide really offers that side-by-side comparison of manual versus AI-assisted thematic analysis based on, at least on our case study, where the manual analysis provided more rich, context-sensitive interpretations that were more grounded in the researchers' understanding of the data, the communities involved that were part of the study, that really allowed us to more clearly attribute perspectives from these dialysis staff and integrate those into the themes that reflected the complexity of social and systemic factors. And part of that is our research team members really are familiar with the literature and the research in this area to be able to do that. If you're asking a research assistant who is a brand new, student doing this, maybe it would have been similar to the AI, but we had some well-trained research staff who were doing this, very familiar with the context, the population that they're studying and working with, that really could not be entirely replaced by AI here. But in contrast, the AI-assisted analysis was, again, much faster and consistent with identifying those patterns. So if you're looking for a real quick solution to do something, this might serve it. And some of the themes were, they were there, but they just lacked sort of the ability to synthesize across some of the levels of meaning. So, I think this comparison reinforces that while AI can be helpful for initial coding or descriptive analysis, it's not going to replace the critical, interpretive, and ethical work of human qualitative researchers. So hopefully the qualitative researchers who are listening or in the room are celebrating that fact. Yes, and this really just summarizes a little bit more, again, on key benefits and limitations for using AI for thematic analysis. So again, processing large volumes of qualitative data quickly. That can be really helpful for time-sensitive projects or large-scale studies. If you just need to have some quick preliminary data for a research grant, for example, but it's not an in-depth analysis, or if you're a student and you have a really low budget and you're not going to be able to spend the time doing this, that might be okay. It's effective at identifying recurring patterns and concrete concepts. And, I think this also could be really helpful for under-resourced settings as well. You think about students or under-resourced settings. But again, I think I've mentioned many of the limitations around limited interpretive depth. Okay, I'm going to just give a quick, I'm going to try to play this real quick as one other example of an AI tool that we had, a web-based platform. Okay, good. Mungai is going to help me see if I can do this. This is HeyGen AI that creates videos using AI avatars and voiceovers. And we use this as to develop a standardized webinar for an ongoing study. And the platform allowed users to upload PowerPoint slides and a speaker script, and then automatically generated a professional video with a virtual presenter. And this saved our team significant amount of time because I think that the recording and prep took less than 15 minutes with HeyGen, and it reduced a lot of the human error that can naturally occur with human presenters. If anyone wants an example of this, we're happy to give it to you. Basically, you can imagine what a very professional sounding webinar presenter would sound like for this. But I'll say that this was really great in that we were going across multiple sites and we needed to make modifications for each site. So could you imagine if you were doing that on your own? And having to re-record that or actually give that live. This was something that really saved us a lot of time. HeyGen does have a cost, but it's relatively low compared to the time and effort saved. You can imagine how this could be used for things like intervention delivery for clinicians or patients, or potentially having someone lead or moderate qualitative interviews or focus groups or interviews. We may see more interventions in the future that may be more comfortable with using these types of tools or AI chatbots to deliver things like tailored messages for study participants. This was a good use case for us because it was lower risk as just this is a webinar for launching our study materials and was helpful for us to introduce some concepts in a really efficient, scalable way. Okay, I'm now going to hand over a few slides to Dr. Adam Wilk to present. So Adam, are you on and can we hear you?
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you. All right, go ahead and I'll just let me know when you want me to advance the slides and I'll do that for you up here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rachel. And I'm very sorry I couldn't be there in person to speak with you all and engage in some Q&A in person. But in the interest of preserving some time for Q&A, I'm probably going to skip through some of the material we have here because it's a little bit duplicative with what Rachel was saying. But we'll jump into it. We've briefly alluded a couple of times to one possibility that I wanted to give some voice to and some color to, and that is the idea that AI could be more intimately involved in qualitative data collection than it has been to date. I don't think we've seen any papers published using AI chatbots to conduct interviews or lead focus groups as well as perhaps be involved in some later steps of the qualitative research process. But I think it's coming. As the AI tools get better, as they pass the Turing test more often, and many participants can't tell the difference between a human or an AI chatbot, maybe it's worth exploring. Of course, the qualitative researcher in me immediately gets worried about rapport building. Can you build rapport with a robot, like in the style of Scarlett Johansson in Her? I don't know. We're probably going to get there. But at least for now, we need to work on ways to engineer our prompts and train the models to better mimic interviewers if we want good quality data coming out of this process. There are certainly some possible advantages here by way of minimizing interviewer fatigue. You could do more and longer interviews. I'm sure you all want to do that. Or you could conduct more interviews. Of course, we also want to be mindful of participant fatigue and distraction, so we need to train models to reflect on that. We can also train AI tools to assess saturation in the course of our data collection process, doing assessments of the depth of the themes that we're seeing and whether additional texture is being added with extra interviews, as opposed to waiting for our weekly qualitative team meetings to assess whether we might be reaching saturation. These are all possibilities and plenty of work to be done to develop methods and advance our work in that space. So I've already alluded to some of the concerns that come into my mind as a qualitative researcher, and I think some of them could be framed fairly within the context of patient-centeredness. I'm going to start with the opportunity here, a key one related to patient-centeredness, and that is with the increasing speed of qualitative data collection and analysis, I think there is an opportunity to broaden the samples of participants that we include in interviews or focus groups or in observational studies that could allow us to add diversity to the pools of participants we speak with. Traditional human-led qualitative studies might have missed a lot of important variation in the populations and their emic perspectives that we can dig into now because we have added capacity to do more data collection. I don't think a lot of qualitative researchers are thinking about AI in these terms yet, but it's something we're going to have to get used to thinking about. And yet there are some key risks here. So I want to be clear. I think of qualitative research as having a goal of elucidating the emic perspective and illustrating variation in the population. But as we've been talking about, if in the context of data collection, maybe we would be thinning some of the data and missing some of that emic perspective, maybe mischaracterizing it, oversimplifying it. And the same would be true in analysis. Maybe some of what we would hope to capture by way of themes or the participant's perspective gets flattened, maybe simplified and hemming to the mean population perspective. It might dampen observation of variation that we're trying to capture with this qualitative research enterprise. Now, we've regularly made the point throughout the presentation that the human researcher's role remains very important in overseeing this work. But as the scale of some of these efforts grows, maybe we'll be tempted to shirk a little bit of that responsibility. And so I think we have to be very conscious and conscientious as qualitative researchers of how our role evolves as we partner with AI tools. And that includes being very careful about what we mean by reflexivity and how we implement self-reflective exercises when working with an AI tool. So we'll move to the next slide. We've alluded to some of these ethical considerations in some previous talks. Dr. Schwartz definitely covered some of these as well. And some of our thoughts related to qualitative research maybe add some nuance here. So again, one example would be the lack of reflexivity. AI doesn't really actively, without you telling them to, engage in any critical self-reflection, which is, of course, a core principle of rigorous qualitative research. And so we have to be very deliberate and find tools that are able to question their own assumptions or recognize how it reached conclusions so that we can assess the logic and credibility of those links. When it comes to bias, too, we have to be careful, I think, about how AI tools may impose societal norms and societal biases into their interpretation of what participants report to us. And we are not always very conscious or actively conscious as human researchers about how those societal biases influence our own interpretations. Maybe the advent of AI as a partner in qualitative research gives us an opportunity to refresh our memory about what it means to be reflexive and to refresh our methods for doing this well. And then I think most of the other ones here we've talked about in some forms already. And so I think we should probably just move ahead to the next slide, few slides really, for talking about recommendations for effective AI integration into the qualitative research process. Rachel, before we move off of that title slide, I want to flag that a lot of the content for some of the successive slides we're taking from a 2025 seminar led by Corinne Seals called Using AI for Qualitative Research. The QR code on this slide is worth linking to. I think it's a great course, and there's a lot of really valuable practical research-informed strategies described there for integrating AI into your work. So if you're interested in more than a 5-minute discussion of these points, please dig in. Okay, so as Rachel talked about, effective prompt engineering is really key here, and she's laid out, I think, a way to be thoughtful about how to structure your prompts and provide a lot of detail in the prompt that I wouldn't have thought to include as a novice AI user in qualitative research, including detail and specifics about the study context, the audience, the purpose of the study, what kind of output you want, and so forth. Now, as we're learning about how to do this well, you can use language like act as a qualitative researcher, maybe to help impose some disciplinary norms into what the AI generates. But, you know, as we get better and better with this, we probably won't have to use such vague language going forward. We'll have better tools at our disposal. You'll want to define the format, tone, and depth of responses. You want to be very deliberate and break up the tasks into individual steps, and also be conscious of whatever constraints the tools you're working with have. Some tools, for example, may limit you to the number of words that the tool can process at a time, particularly if you're using, you know, free-to-use versions and the like. And so want to be careful about how you're using the tool and recognizing its constraints. All right, so these are some sort of toy examples for how doing a better job of effective prompt engineering can get you better results. I think some of these are pretty straightforward, and you can look at them on your own time after the presentation. In summary, though, Rachel, if you click forward, AI can give you an early sense as to what's out there. The more you are involved as a researcher, the better you can engineer your prompts, and the better you can ensure that the product of the AI's analysis gets close to your intended research question and objectives. All right, so here is a framework that we're building. It's a sort of an addition or an amendment to what Seals has put together for talking about how to evaluate the effectiveness of AI in qualitative research. And if evaluating the effectiveness of AI in qualitative research is your objective, you're probably already thinking in these terms. But if you're not, if you're just thinking about being a user of AI in your own qualitative research endeavors, then I think evaluating the effectiveness of AI in your study context is a really important step to consider taking and maybe dedicating some significant resources to. And so if you're not thinking about publishing your own evaluations of AI, you still want to probably use a framework like this to assess to what extent AI is a useful tool for you, including assessing things like accuracy and interpretive depth. It's some of the things that we've talked about previous studies showing AI may struggle with in some cases. And then there's the efficiency side. Does it save time without losing depth? That should read losing. And what does meaningfully losing depth mean for you? Well, you have to assess that for your own study context, of course. And then, of course, we all need to be engaged in thoughtful reflection on the potential ethical concerns, biases introduced using these tools, and what does it mean to engage in reflexivity in these kinds of studies. So Corinne Seals' presentation seminar had a similar framework that defines what success or failure might look like relative to each of these standards. And I won't go through all of this in too much detail, but I'll say for accuracy and reliability, you would want to see strong overlap between AI-coded themes and human-coded ones, like 80 to 90% or better. And you'd want to avoid needing to make major corrections. And you can use metrics like Cohen's kappa or the Jockard Similarity Index to quantify accuracy in this way. Assessing time efficiency is relatively straightforward. You just compare how long manual versus AI analysis takes for a fixed task. And I think it would probably be fair to characterize it as a success if AI saves 50 to 70% or more of the researcher's time without sacrificing quality meaningfully. Again, meaningfully is a loaded word there. For context and interpretability, you can perform a sentiment classification and test whether AI actually correctly identifies sarcasm or metaphor or cultural nuance where you as the human researcher have identified those things are present. And again, in some research contexts, those values or the ability to identify those things can be paramount. Now, for bias detection, where if you're in a study context where you're aiming for output that reflects unbiased themes and not reproducing stereotypes, you can use tools like FairLearn or WeCount to audit AI outputs for those stereotypes. And there's two more criteria that Seals talks about on the next slide, Rachel. Transparency and explainability. It's useful to be able to see a clear rationale for why AI tools code or categorize phrases within specific themes. And so if the AI tool is capable of providing such rationales and showing its work, you should ask for it and vet. Of course, if you see evidence of illogic or absence of rationales, that would reflect some kind of failure here. Now, looking at the rationale and thinking about how you reach a conclusion is part of the human's reflexivity process. So I think we ought to be thinking about these last two criteria as related to one another. But within Seals' framework, reflexivity, she reclassifies as something that's measured separately in the context of improving one's analysis in response to human feedback and input. So if the AI tool improves, that's a good thing, surely. But I think reflexivity enters in here in part through the feedback that we as the researcher provide. If we're thoughtful and consider our own perspective and biases as we provide this feedback and we document our efforts to do so, and then the AI responds in kind, then I think you might say that you and the AI have together engaged in some form of reflexivity. But I do think there's a lot of room to develop definitions and new evaluation methodology on this particular criterion. If you're looking for a structured approach, which I would generally recommend, there are several options out there. One is called GAITA, or Guided AI Thematic Analysis, which was published by Nguyen Truong and colleagues earlier this year. In short, the idea is that researchers don't use AI passively. Instead, you expect to have a series of collaborative interactions with your AI support, interactions between the human experts and the machine support, with four main steps related to prompting, assisted coding, human validation, and synthesis. But the structure of this sort of process helps to ensure that there is full or adequate transparency, I would say, with how themes emerged, which of course in turn supports reproducibility and perceptions of rigor. Next slide, it talks about some ethical recommendations. We've talked about these themes generally already, so I won't go into any depth here, particularly since we're running short of time. But I think it is notable that one bullet point on here speaks to consent. Dr. Schwartz raised, I think, a fair question. What do we expect participants would do with information that any transcripts from this qualitative study may be filtered through an AI tool at some point? And I'm not really sure what I would do if I were a participant presented with that information. But I do think it's a reasonable thing to get in the practice, at least, of being transparent about this kind of thing, particularly as we or society more generally figures out how to respond to this kind of information. All right, so in the interest of time, I'll just move ahead to talking about some resources for integrating AI into your qualitative research at IU. We've name-checked a handful of AI large language models and tools in the course of this talk. But in just reviewing what's available specifically for IU researchers, I would highlight a few things specifically. One, the Social Science Research Commons has a Qual Lab that highlights its capacity to provide access to certain qualitative research resources. Historically, that has been like MaxQDA and NVivo, which they still offer licenses to. But they also now foster access to something called ATS Manager, that is Automated Transcription Service Manager, which is based primarily on Amazon Transcribe and some Google Cloud speech-to-text functions. But it is one of the most recommended and free resources available to IU researchers now for transcription supports. You can also use Microsoft Teams and Copilot, and other services are approved. You can pay fees to use them. If a literature review is a key part of your qualitative research study, the library has recommended a couple of tools like elicit and Copilot for scouring what literature is available and accessible to these tools. And then they also recommend Research Rabbit and Semantic Scholar for summarizing information that you've uncovered. And then on the analysis side, you can use tools like Copilot and Gemini, like Rachel showed and demonstrated earlier. And then, of course, you can also use MaxQDA and NVivo because they too have incorporated AI supplements and supports called AI Assist and Lumivero, respectively. I would recommend consulting SSRC's Qual Lab for info on Atlas TI, which was mentioned earlier, and other tools that are available to IU researchers just aren't as well described, for example, on their website. And then generally, we've mentioned, and previous speakers in this series have mentioned the UITS AI Academy as a great resource for checking in on what licenses and approved uses for these tools are accessible to IU researchers. I would echo their recommendation to keep monitoring that page. So Rachel, would you like to handle conclusions and maybe solicit one question with the time we have left?
That's great. I'm just going to leave the conclusions here up on this slide and conclude on this because I think a lot of these we've said before and would love to open it up for questions. So thank you all for your attention and hopefully we have time for a question or two. Those of you in the room can come up to the mic. Those of you online can enter it into the chat and then quick acknowledgements, thank you, and contact information. And while people are waiting, an announcement November 18th, noon to 1 p.m. for the next seminar in this AI workshop series on participant messaging using AI for study marketing.
Thank you for doing my job. I was going to say that. Questions in the room. We have at least one question online, which Medina will relate to us. Nicole?
Mm-hmm. Oh, thanks. Titus is going to hold this for me. Nice. Okay, so I did see it on Adam's slide where there was actually the kappa statistic that was mentioned. But I wonder, when we do it the old-fashioned way, when we're training coders, we're constantly kind of retraining and trying to get to an established kappa. Have there been studies that have retrained AI models to get to a better match between a human and an AI coder?
That's a great question. I have not seen that. Adam, any thoughts on that one?
I haven't seen any studies specifically employing the methodology that you describe either, but it seems like a very reasonable approach. There certainly is plenty of evidence of research teams retraining their AI analysts in the course of the study. And so presumably they did so until they reached a point where they were sufficiently comfortable with the results to publish them. But I don't recall seeing specifically a Cohen's kappa statistic to evaluate that process.
And I would just say too that for those of you that are using AI in your qualitative research, please publish because I think the literature is really lacking in a lot of the, again, maybe it's all under review right now and we just haven't seen it, but I think present those as abstracts. I think there's a lot of thirst for knowledge in this area and we need to see more.
Yeah, great point. We're going to go to the one online question and then we'll have to conclude. So Medina, can you read the online question?
Yeah, I think this question is for Rachel. Can you talk a little bit more about what work you did to train the AI system before using it for transcription? Or maybe explain what you think the vendor did to make their AI tool better than the generic AI tools that are available to the general public?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And I'd say this was our sort of quick and dirty, just take the audio transcription and upload it directly without giving it any particular prompts. And so it could very much be improved if you upload that and then give additional prompts. So in terms of transcription alone. So I think if, others may have more experience with that, but that as a just quick free tool, that's what we had access to without any additional prompts. I mean, you could go and then ask for additional prompts depending on what your needs were. Ours at that point were just around the transcription, but you could imagine using additional prompts to say and summarize and do XYZ, similar to the other example I presented that did use prompts when we had a specific analysis that we were doing to employ. Hopefully that makes sense.
Actually, a final comment. While you were showing the transcription comparison, I was thinking of Microsoft Teams. That doesn't have any trouble identifying the speakers because we're all logged in separately. So that's clean. And I also thought when I scanned transcripts, they got the sentence structure right. So as you already said, everything's outdated by the time you present it.
Absolutely, I agree. And I think, yeah, if you're doing this with study participants and they're not all logged in, you may not have that. Or if you're think about the context of if you do a focus group and you're all, if it's not all online, but you're in a room and recording it, there's a lot of nuance there that you have to think through. But again, it's getting better and better and better. So thank you.
All right. Thank you to Rachel and Adam, and see you on the 18th.